already all sorts of things which happened. Punishment has nothing to do with what is called punishment in the legal language. When you talk about punishment, then you should, in the first place, interrogate yourself about what is your own experience of punishment. What do you call punishment? Because we have been punished, naturally, already as a child, and we have punished children and other people. So, and that idea, what was punishment, has changed in the time. When I look now at my own experience as a punisher of my children, and how I relate to my grandchildren, and what has happened in my own ideas about how you should behave as an adult to children, has completely changed. I mean, and so we should not call a thing punishment which does not correlate with what happens in our societies, what are people calling punishment, and how they are doing it. And that's just one of the big problems, that people are continuing then to call those strange things what happen in criminal justice, and where there is no relation whatsoever between the people who is set to punish and the people who is punished, that we call that still punishment. We should not, in a social science, you should not call that punishment. Also because in the whole psychology, naturally, there are completely different definitions of punishment than those definitions in criminal justice. So, when you talk about criminal justice, what is going on there, in which people have to pay things, and when they are put in prison and all those things, to call that punishment should not be called punishment. I do not know how it should be called, but it should not be called punishment and not compared with that. And so, then let's go now to that process of change, because naturally, in that process of change, you started to challenge those concepts to which the persons in that process were used to. That was one of the important aspects of that process of change. Now, what was specific for that process of change in that time, that was that we had been occupied by the Germans, and that many of us who were actors in that process of change had had the experience of the occupation. Now, I am now in part of the world where people have had the whole time experiences of occupation, and what you experienced here in Lithuania, but in many of those countries. But for us anyway, in Holland, we were not so often occupied. We had been neutral in the First World War, and so it was a long time ago, in the Napoleonic times, that we had been occupied. And so, for us, that occupation and the fact that the government officials did not oppose really the occupation had for many of us had a deep effect, because we did not believe the state anymore. The state as it was represented in the politicians and in the functionaries, we knew that we could not really trust them, because there was so much cooperation with the Germans and with the occupation by people who were not Nazis at all, that you could see that you could not trust them. And for many of us, that was what we experienced. And actually, we had several, one of us, I too, we had the experience of deprivation of liberty, and to be in those cells, and sometimes in concentration camps. So we knew what we were talking about. And that had as a consequence that many different people who were related in some way to criminal justice had a same movement in looking in a different way at criminal justice. I remember that one of my colleagues, and he became later a very important politician, and he was from the Christian Democrat group, and then he was the second man in the prison service, and then he became also a temporary professor in the Nijmegen University, and very early in the 60s, when that was not all common, he held there an introductory speech in which he said, I do not know if in any way the prison is necessary. I cannot give an answer to that. But I know one thing, that nobody can be made better in a prison. And that putting people in prison is just creating more difficulties. And that my task is to try to bring those difficulties which are created by the prison to make them smaller. So he held such a sort of, and so many people from many places did that sort of thing. So what happened was that there came a movement which was not really organized from a certain point. And so then we had those specific things in criminal justice, in the structure of criminal justice, the fact that there was the possibility not to prosecute, and that it was changed by the prosecutors that there had to be a reason that something would be gained by prosecution. That was one thing. And another thing was that we had a general minimum. So we had never a minimum for a certain incrimination. There was a general minimum of 1 day of imprisonment for everything. Also for murder, for treason, everything. And there was naturally a lot of possibilities to apply fine. And later in that process, but that was a little bit in the end of the process, imprisonment and fines were put at the same level in our penal code. For everything is also possible the fine. And in thinking that, we wanted to make the fine, like the imprisonment was the symbol of something. We wanted to make from the fine also a symbol, because you could use everything as a symbol. So that were things inside criminal justice which made it easier than it is now in Litauen to change, because there were less obstacles to change. And actually that opportunity principle was a very important one. The general minimum was also an important one. And then there were a lot of things around criminal justice and partly in criminal justice. When you look at Holland in that time, then social work was very much on the move, because a lot of things which had done before in voluntary work were now replaced by trained social workers. And those social workers were trained in a type of social work when they were more clinical, which was very client-oriented, and came from the United States. It was not possible for them to do it in the United States because they didn't let them to be so client-oriented. But in Holland, they got a chance to be so client-oriented because Holland had the experience of the columns in